just wanted you to know I'll be splitting my time today with the member from Disnethi, Missinippi, Churchill River. It's a sad day to be speaking here on behalf of the constituents of Saskatoon West. When I first ran for office 2.5 years ago, I never thought I would spend most of my time representing my constituents during a time of COVID-19. When I ran for re-election just 6 months ago, I never imagined I would be representing them during a debate about martial law being imposed upon them. From day one, in that campaign, when the Prime Minister deliberately set out to wedge, divide, and stigmatize our population, the wisest among us may have foreseen this power grab. Unfortunately, I was naive enough to think that even this Prime Minister had a modicum of love and respect for his fellow Canadians and for democracy. The truth is, his love is for power, his respect is for dictatorships. So, what is the Emergency Act, Madam Speaker? I want to be absolutely clear. This is a naked power grab by the Prime Minister, and I will not be supporting it. This act allows the government, under certain strict criteria, to override all established laws, regulations, and norms of Canadian democracy. It is, simply put, the imposition of martial law. And the New York Times reported these measures for what they are: temporary suspension of civil liberties. This legislation is a successor to the War Measures Act and has never been used in Canadian history. Its predecessor was used during the World Wars to help Canada mobilize, and by the first Trudeau to go after real terrorists in Quebec during the FLQ crisis in 1970. Today, his son, our current Prime Minister, is using emergency powers to clear vehicles on Ottawa streets. To be clear, I, along with my colleagues in the Conservative Party, have called for an end to these blockades. But the vehicles at the U.S. border crossings were already gone before this Emergency Act was even initiated. The Liberals said they needed this power to compel Ottawa tow truck drivers. They didn't. Existing laws already gave that power. In fact, nearly everything they are doing could have been done under the provincial emergency order. The extraordinary powers of the Federal Emergency Act have never been invoked, even when the Twin Towers were toppled on 9/11, when we went to war in Afghanistan, or when an actual terrorist stormed Parliament here in 2014 and tried to assassinate the Prime Minister. The fact is, this Prime Minister mishandled this situation right from the beginning. Every parent teaches their child to use their words and not their fists. Instead, our incompetent Prime Minister chose division over leadership, chose name-calling over dialogue. As an aviation enthusiast, I'm fascinated by airplane crashes. The root cause of a plane crash can always be traced to someone not even on the plane. The reason for the crash is never the most obvious one. You have to keep asking why. Why did the engine quit? Why did you run out of fuel? Why was the fuel gauge incorrect? Et cetera, until you get to the root cause. If we apply that strategy here, what is the root cause of the unrest that we see today? Is it the protesters themselves? Certainly they will be the ones held accountable for their actions, but why were they here? One root cause was the mandate for truckers to be vaccinated. Who forced that? The Prime Minister. Another root cause is frustration and weariness with COVID restrictions in general. When the provinces began to relax restrictions, the federal government was intent on keeping them in place. Who forced that? Again, the Prime Minister. In fact, time and time again, you can trace the root cause of this conflict right to the feet of the Prime Minister. His own MPs have said that the Prime Minister has politicized the pandemic, using division and fear to pit Canadian against Canadian. We have neighbours snitching on neighbours, fully encouraged by the government. This Prime Minister desires division, and he depends on it to retain his political power. Conservatives, Madam Speaker, want to lead with dialogue and mutual respect. We know that a root cause of this conflict is the lack of a plan to move us past the COVID restrictions of the last 2 years. So, last Monday, there was a vote in this House of Commons on our Conservative motion to make a plan to end COVID-19 mandates and restrictions. The Liberals and their lackeys in the NDP voted it down. In this situation, it's the cheerleading of the NDP that is perhaps the most telling of all. The NDP, going back to its CCF roots in Saskatchewan, pretends to be the hero of the little guy, the working class. These last few weeks have finally discredited that myth. We know that many of the current NDP are self-proclaimed socialists. Just like our Prime Minister admires Communist China's basic dictatorship, today's NDP looks back in time at Lenin and Stalin and yearn for a return to those days. The whole philosophy of socialism, as written by Marx, was to put down dissent and seize power through violence. I read with great interest the tweet of former NDP Member of Parliament Sven Robinson. He was referring to the 1970 vote when the first Trudeau invoked these emergency powers. Sven said, quote, "The NDP caucus in 1970 under Tommy Douglas took a courageous and principled stand against the War Measures Act. Today's NDP under betrays that legacy and supports Liberals on the Emergencies Act. Shame. A very dangerous precedent is being set." End quote. Traditionally, the NDP has stood on the side of civil liberties and prevented governments from being granted sweeping powers. Today's NDP, not so much. Now, this won't come as a surprise to current NDP leadership, but this should be a wake-up call to all Canadians who support the NDP. The NDP is not the friend of democracy. Madam Speaker, I want to get to the heart of the matter. A leader skilled in dividing and stigmatizing is also skilled at distracting. Like a clever magician, our Prime Minister is having us look at downtown Ottawa while he works behind the scenes to carry out his true goal. What is that? Well, as they say, follow the money. The Finance Minister let slip this week that their real desire is to make some of the emergency measures permanently available to the government. And which measures was she referring to? Financial tools. Now, let's take a step back. All dictators want control. In our modern society, control is exercised through money. You can't do anything without money. Even exercising constitutional freedoms requires money. For example, freedom of speech might require a website, a pamphlet, an advertisement, etc., all of which require money. If you take away our money, you take away our freedoms. My parents grew up with cash. You could accumulate a pillowcase full of cash, put all that cash into a briefcase, and buy your neighbor's house by handing that briefcase over to him. In most of human history, that is how transactions were done, using shells, gold, cattle, etc. Today, if you show up with a briefcase full of money, you'll likely be arrested. Governments, through their central banks, want cash to be eliminated so they can control our money and therefore control us. And this plan was going very well until GoFundMe and cryptocurrencies showed up. These new payment methods have thrown a big monkey wrench into the wheels of government control, until now. What did the Finance Minister let slip this week? That they would take the overreaching powers of the Emergency Act regarding financial controls and make them permanent, particularly as they relate to crowdsourcing and cryptocurrencies. In other words, in a moment when Canadians are allowing the government to have absolute power, the government is using that opportunity to slip in some permanent changes. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm just making an observation, and I'm hoping that people pick up on this discussion and really pay attention. Madam Speaker, these emergency powers are significant. What are the people of Saskatoon West saying about this? Cora, in my riding, said, quote, "This language of hate and division needs to stop. Love and kindness is the only way forward. I can't help but wonder if we continue on this path, how long it will take for myself to be on the receiving side of hate from our government because of policies that go against my well-intended morals and values. It's only a matter of time, and I'm scared," end quote. Well, I'm scared too. Matthew said this, quote, "As a constituent of your riding, I just wanted to voice my extreme concern that the federal government of Canada has implemented this measure over a peaceful protest. I know you're part of the opposition, and I have been glad to see some of the members of your party speak plainly to the Canadian people. I don't typically take the time to get involved in politics, but it's absolutely disgusting what's going on right now. I'm embarrassed to be a Canadian at this point," end quote. We should all be embarrassed, Madam Speaker. A recent immigrant from Bangladesh told me plainly, quote, "Things going on in Ottawa is very sad. The Prime Minister is becoming a dictator. People around the globe know Canada as a calm and peaceful nation. We love friendly, peaceful Canada, and that is why we moved to Canada. Please raise your united voice in the House against all kinds of violence," end quote. The Prime Minister is embarrassing Canada on a global scale. But all is not lost, Madam Speaker. My home province of Saskatchewan shone a beacon of hope last week for Canada. We ended the vaccine passport system on February 14th, the very same day the Prime Minister took his drastic step federally. I've listened to my constituents, unlike the Prime Minister, who attempts to shut down opposing voices. Madam Speaker, I have much more to say, but my time is up. So in summary, the Prime Minister has created this situation. He has the power to make it worse, and the power to make it better. I pray he chooses wisely.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Laval-Les-Îles.
And thanks for my colleague for his comment. Madam Speaker, I would like to ask my colleague if he owns a business in downtown area and for 3 weeks he cannot open, he cannot pay his rent, and he has to tell his employees that, sorry, you have to lose his job. I would like to ask him in addition how we think about the closing a bridge, which is a very vital path for our commercial trade between us and United States, and threaten our supply chain. I would like to ask him also, how can he think about those people receiving funds from outside Canada? I would like to ask him, what does he think about more than 70 people, Madam Speaker, supporting the decision of the Prime Minister? I would like to ask him, is he aware that the Prime Minister was patient enough? They stayed close